From suffering to glory. That is the only way to describe what happened to a woman named Clara Jennings on a cold November night in Chicago. From suffering to glory. A transformation so complete, so stunning, that every single person at that party stopped breathing for a moment when she walked through those doors. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand where Clara was just 72 hours before. You need to understand the depths from which she had been pulled. And you need to understand the man, the dangerous, powerful, unlikely man who decided that her pain had gone on long enough. Clara Jennings was 41 years old, and she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not glanced at, not looked through. Seen. She lived in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago, a second-floor unit above a dry cleaner that had been closed for 2 years. The hallway always smelled like old chemicals and damp carpet. Her front door had a lock that stuck, and she had learned to kick it just right with her left foot while turning the key with both hands. It was the kind of place a person ended up in, not the kind of place a person chose. And Clara had ended up there after 17 years of marriage to a man named Gerald who, one Tuesday morning, told her over breakfast that he had been in love with someone else for the past 4 years, and that he was leaving. Just like that. No argument, no fight. Just a bowl of oatmeal going cold on the table and the sound of a suitcase zipper closing in the bedroom. The divorce took everything. Gerald had been the breadwinner. Gerald had the connections. Gerald had the lawyer who played golf with the judge. Clara walked away with a settlement so small it was almost an insult, a 10-year-old car with a cracked windshield, and a sense of worthlessness so heavy she could feel it in her bones every single morning when the alarm went off at 5:30. She worked 2 jobs. The first was at a laundromat 6, blocks from her apartment where she folded other people's clothes for 8 hours a day. The second was a night shift at a 24-hour diner on Halsted Street where she waited tables for tips that rarely exceeded $3. She ate 1 full meal a day, usually whatever the cook at the diner would let her take home in a styrofoam container. She had stopped buying new clothes 2 years ago. She had stopped wearing makeup 3 years ago. She had stopped looking in mirrors altogether, because the woman staring back at her was someone she did not recognize, someone hollowed out, with dark circles under her eyes and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Clara had one friend, just one. A woman named Deborah Price, who she had known since high school. Deborah was loud, warm, and relentless in the way only a true friend can be. She called Clara every Sunday night, and every Sunday night Clara would answer the phone, say she was fine, and then sit in silence while Deborah talked enough for both of them. Deborah had been trying to get Clara to come to a holiday party for the past 3 years. Every year Clara said no. Every year Deborah let it go, but this year Deborah was not letting it go. "Clara, listen to me," Deborah said on the phone that Sunday night, her voice firm but gentle. "This is not just any party. This is the Morrison Gala. Do you understand what I'm telling you? 300 people, live music, the kind of food you only see in magazines. And I got you an invitation because my boss's wife is on the planning committee. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing." Clara was sitting on her couch, which had a spring that poked through the left cushion. She had placed a folded towel over it so many times that the towel had become a permanent fixture. "Deborah, I don't have anything to wear. I don't have shoes. I don't have the energy." "I know," Deborah said quietly. And for a moment, the line went silent. "I know you don't. But, Clara, you've been disappearing, and I'm scared. I'm scared that one day I'm going to call this number and you're not going to answer. Not because something happened to you, but because you just stopped caring enough to pick up the phone." Clara closed her eyes. She wanted to argue, but the truth was sitting in her chest like a stone. "Just think about it," Deborah said. "The party is Saturday. Just think about it." Clara hung up and stared at the wall. There was a water stain on the ceiling. That had been growing for 6 months. She had reported it to the landlord 4 times. He never came. Nobody ever came. What Clara did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that her life was about to collide with a world she had never imagined. A world of power, of secrets, of men who operated in shadows and made decisions that moved entire cities, and at the center of that world was a man named Vincent Moretti. Now, before we go any further, check if you are subscribed to this channel. Stories like this, stories about real transformation, about people rising from the lowest point of their lives, these are the stories we tell here every single week. Subscribe now so you never miss one. Vincent Moretti was 63 years old and had been running the Moretti family organization for the past 28 years. He was not the kind of man you saw in movies. No flashy suits, no gold chains, no loud voice. Vincent was quiet, deliberate. He wore dark wool overcoats and simple leather shoes. He kept his silver hair trimmed short and his face clean-shaven. He had deep lines around his eyes that came not from laughter, but from decades of watching, calculating, and deciding. He ran his operations from the back office of a restaurant called Vecchio's on Taylor Street, in the heart of Little Italy. The restaurant served the best osso buco in the city, and it was always full, which meant that the constant flow of people in and out never raised any eyebrows. Vincent sat at the same corner table every day, drinking espresso from a small white cup and reading the Tribune with a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Vincent was feared, yes, but he was also respected in a way that went beyond fear. He had a code. He had always had a code. He did not allow his people to harm civilians. He did not allow operations that targeted the vulnerable. He funded 3 community centers on the South Side anonymously. He paid for the education of every child in his extended family, cousins and second cousins included, whether they were involved in the organization or not. He sent flowers to the funeral of every person in his neighborhood who passed away, regardless of whether he knew them. Some people called him old-fashioned. Some people called him sentimental. Nobody called him weak. The last person who had called him weak had disappeared from public life so completely that even his own family stopped asking questions after a while. Vincent had one, vulnerability, and he guarded it carefully. He had lost his wife, Maria, 12 years ago to a long illness. She had been the love of his life, the only person who could make him laugh, the only person who could tell him he was wrong and have him actually listen. Maria had been a schoolteacher before she married Vincent. She had known exactly who he was and what he did, and she had married him anyway because she saw something in him that most people were too afraid to look for. After she died, something in Vincent shifted. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The men around him noticed but said nothing. You did not comment on Vincent Moretti's grief. You simply worked harder and hoped that whatever storm was inside him would pass. But it did not pass. It settled. It became a permanent weather system inside Vincent's chest, a low grey sky that never quite broke into rain but never cleared either. And over the years, Vincent developed a quiet habit that none of his men fully understood. He noticed people who were suffering, not in a general philosophical way. He noticed specific people. A shopkeeper whose store had been vandalized would find the damage repaired overnight. A widow struggling to pay her heating bill would discover an anonymous payment covering the entire winter. A teenager who had been caught stealing food would be offered a job at one of Vincent's legitimate businesses, a construction company, a catering service, a janitorial firm, with no questions asked and no strings attached. Vincent did these things not for loyalty, not for leverage, not for any strategic reason. He did them because Maria had taught him that power without compassion was just cruelty wearing a suit. And it was through this habit, this quiet, watchful compassion, that Vincent Moretti first noticed Clara Jennings. It happened on a Wednesday night. Vincent was being driven home from a meeting in a black sedan. His driver, a large man named Tommy, who had been with the family for 20 years, took the same route every night, down Halstead past the old meatpacking district, through the quiet streets south of the Loop. They were stopped at a red light at the corner of Halstead and 31st when Vincent looked out the window and saw a woman through the glass front of a diner. She was standing behind the counter, and even from across the street, even through the rain-streaked window of the car, Vincent could see it. The emptiness. She was not just tired. She was not just overworked. She was someone who had given up on the idea that anything good would ever happen to her again. He recognized that look because he had seen it in his own mirror for years after Maria died. "Tommy," Vincent said quietly. "Pull over." Tommy glanced in the rearview mirror. "Here, boss." "Here." Tommy parked the sedan across the street from the diner. Vincent did not get out. He sat in the back seat and watched. He watched Clara serve a table of 4 men who did not look at her when she set their plates down. He watched her refill coffee cups for a couple who were arguing so loudly they did not notice her hand shaking. He watched her stand behind the counter during a lull, staring at nothing, her shoulders slumped, her apron stained, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, and something in Vincent's chest, that low grey sky, shifted. "Who is she?" Vincent asked. Tommy looked at the diner, then back at Vincent. "I don't know, boss. You want me to find out?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Find out." Tommy found out. It took him 2 days. Clara Jennings, 41, divorced, 2 jobs, no children, no family in the area except a cousin in Milwaukee she had not spoken to in years, 1 friend, no savings, behind on rent. The car she drove had a check engine light that had been on for 8 months. She ate her meals standing up because sitting down at a table alone made her feel more alone than standing. Tommy delivered this information to Vincent in the back office of Vecchio's, reading from a small notebook, his voice careful and neutral. When he finished, Vincent stared at the espresso cup in front of him for a full minute without speaking. "There is a party on Saturday," Vincent said finally. Tommy blinked. "The Morrison Gala. Yes, sir, you declined the invitation." "Undecline it." Tommy paused. "Sir, I want to go to that party, and I want her there." Tommy closed his notebook slowly. He had been with Vincent long enough to know when to ask questions and when to simply say, "Yes, sir." This was a yes, sir moment, but the problem was not getting Vincent into the Morrison Gala. Vincent Moretti could walk into any room in Chicago and be welcomed, feared, or both. The problem was Clara. Vincent understood with the intuition that had kept him alive for 63 years that you could not simply invite a woman like Clara to a party like that. She would say no. She would say she had nothing to wear. She would say she did not belong. And she would be right, not because she did not deserve to be there, but because the world had spent years convincing her that she did not. So Vincent did what Vincent always did. He built a plan, a quiet, careful, layered plan. The first layer was Deborah. Vincent had Tommy make a call to a woman named Lucia DeLuca, who ran the finest dress shop on Michigan Avenue. Lucia was not part of Vincent's organization, but she owed him a favor. He had helped her son get into a culinary school in New York 3 years ago, when no one else would give the boy a chance. Vincent told Tommy to tell Lucia that a woman would be coming into her shop on Thursday, brought by a friend. The woman's name was Clara. She would be hesitant. She might try to leave. Lucia was to treat her like the most important client who had ever walked through her door. Everything, the dress, the shoes, the alterations, was to be put on a tab that Lucia would send to Vincent. Clara was never to know who was paying. If she asked, Lucia was to say it was a promotional event, a giveaway, anything, just not the truth, not yet. The second layer was the salon. Vincent sent Tommy to speak with a woman named Gina Marchetti, who owned a hair and beauty salon on Oak Street. Same arrangement, same instructions. Clara would come in on Saturday morning. She was to be treated like royalty. Vincent would cover everything. Anonymity was essential. The third layer was transportation. Vincent arranged for a cars, not one of his usual black sedans, but a clean, elegant town car with a professional driver, to pick Clara up from her apartment on Saturday evening. The driver would tell her it was part of the party's courtesy service. Simple, clean, believable. But the most important layer was the one that required no money and no planning. It required Deborah. And so, on Wednesday evening, Tommy showed up at Deborah Price's workplace, a dental office on State Street, and asked to speak with her. Privately. Deborah, understandably, was alarmed. A large man in a dark coat asking to speak with you privately after work was not a comforting scenario. But Tommy was gentle. He explained that a mutual acquaintance, he did not use Vincent's name, had learned about Clara's situation and wanted to help. Anonymously, no strings, no expectations. He simply wanted Clara to go to the Morrison Gala and to feel, for one night, like the person she used to be. Deborah stared at Tommy for a long time. "Who is this person?" she asked. "Someone who has been where she is," Tommy said simply. "Someone who knows what it feels like to lose everything and forget who you were before." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. She did not ask any more questions. She simply said, "Tell me what I need to do." And so the plan was set in motion. On Thursday afternoon, Deborah called Clara and told her she had won a raffle at work. The prize was a complete outfit from a boutique on Michigan Avenue. Clara laughed. A small disbelieving laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. "Deborah, I didn't enter any raffle. I entered for you," Deborah said, which was technically not a lie, because Deborah had made a decision on Clara's behalf. "Come on, we're going. I'm picking you up at 3. Clara protested. She protested in the car. She protested walking down Michigan Avenue. She protested standing in front of Lucia DeLuca's boutique, looking at the mannequins in the window wearing dresses that cost more than 3 months of her rent. "Deborah, I can't go in there. Look at me." Deborah grabbed her hand. "That is exactly why we're going in there." Lucia DeLuca was waiting. She was a small woman in her 60s, with silver hair pinned up in an elegant twist and sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Clara, at the worn sneakers, the faded jeans, the oversized sweater that hung off her frame because she had lost weight she could not afford to lose. And she saw exactly what Vincent had seen. A woman who had been beautiful once and had forgotten it. A woman who had been strong once and had lost the evidence. Lucia walked straight up to Clara, took both her hands and said, "You have the most extraordinary bone structure I have seen in 40 years of dressing women. Come with me." Clara looked at Deborah, stunned. Deborah just smiled and gave her a little push. What followed was 2 hours that Clara would later describe as the most surreal experience of her life. Lucia brought out dress after dress, midnight blue, emerald green, deep burgundy, soft gold. She draped fabrics over Clara's shoulders, held colors up to her face, stepped back, squinted, shook her head, and tried another. She spoke to Clara the entire time, not in the empty flattery of a salesperson, but in the precise, passionate language of a craftsman who saw raw material and knew exactly what to do with it. "Your coloring is cool-toned. You need depth, not brightness. The burgundy would wash you out. The blue, yes. Look at how the blue catches the gray in your eyes. You have gray eyes, you know that. Most people with gray eyes don't know it. They think their eyes are blue. But yours are gray, like winter sky, and this fabric makes them the center of your face, which is exactly where they should be." Clara stood in front of the mirror in a midnight blue dress that Lucia had selected, floor length, with a subtle shimmer in the fabric, a modest neckline, and a cut that somehow made Clara look taller, leaner, and more present than she had in years. She stared at herself, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not look away. "That's the one," Lucia said softly. Clara touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "How much is this?" "It's covered," Lucia said. "Everything is covered. Tonight, you are my guest." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but Lucia held up a hand. "Some gifts, you simply accept. You accept them because the universe is trying to tell you something, and if you refuse, you might not hear it again for a very long time." Clara looked at Deborah. Deborah was crying, not sobbing, just standing there with tears rolling quietly down her cheeks and the biggest smile Clara had ever seen. "Okay," Clara whispered. "Okay." Lucia also provided shoes, simple black heels, elegant, not too high, a small clutch purse, a wrap for the evening chill. She had everything tailored to Clara's measurements that same afternoon, promising delivery to Clara's apartment by Saturday morning. As they were leaving, Lucia pulled Deborah aside. "You tell whoever arranged this," Lucia said, her voice low and fierce, that this is the most beautiful thing anyone has asked me to do in my entire career. And that woman is going to walk into that party and she is going to stop the room. Deborah nodded, unable to speak. On Saturday morning, Clara woke up at 5:30 as always. Her body did not know how to sleep past 5:30 anymore. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about calling Deborah and cancelling. She thought about the dress hanging on the back of her closet door. She had hung it there the night before, and even in the dim light of her bedroom, the midnight blue fabric seemed to glow. She thought about the shoes sitting in their box on the kitchen counter. She thought about all the reasons she should not go. She was too old. She was too tired. She did not know how to make conversation with wealthy people. She would say something wrong. She would stand in a corner and be invisible, the way she was invisible every day of her life. But then she thought about what Deborah had said on the phone. "You've been disappearing." And something in Clara, some tiny, stubborn spark that had refused to go out despite everything, flared. She got up. She made coffee. She took a shower. And at 10 o'clock, when a car arrived to take her to the salon on Oak Street, part of the raffle package, Deborah had told her, Clara got in. Gina Marchetti's salon was warm and smelled like lavender and eucalyptus. Gina herself was a boisterous woman with red-framed glasses and a laugh that could be heard from the street. She sat Clara down in a chair, ran her fingers through Clara's hair, which had not been professionally cut in over 3 years, and said, "Oh, honey, we are going to have some fun today." For the next 4 hours, Clara was shampooed, conditioned, trimmed, styled, and made up by Gina and her team of 3 assistants. They worked with a quiet intensity that told Clara these women took their craft seriously. Gina cut Clara's hair to just above her shoulders, adding layers that gave it movement and body. She chose a warm chestnut color that brought out the natural red tones Clara had forgotten she had. The makeup was subtle but transformative, a soft, smoky eye that made Clara's grey irises look almost silver, a touch of color on her cheeks, a deep rose lip that gave her face warmth and definition. When they were finished, Gina spun the chair around to face the mirror. Clara did not recognize herself, not in the way she had not recognized herself before, that bleak, who is that person feeling she got every morning. This was different. Is that me? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gina leaned down and put her hands on Clara's shoulders. "That has always been you, sweetheart. You just couldn't see her for a while." Clara pressed her fingers to her lips, and for the second time in 3 days, she felt tears. But these tears were different. These tears were warm. By 5 o'clock that evening, Clara was standing in her apartment in the midnight blue dress, the black heels, her hair gleaming, her makeup perfect, staring at the full-length mirror that hung on the bathroom door, a mirror she had avoided for years. And she was shaking. Not from cold. Not from fear exactly. From something she could not name. It was the feeling of coming. Back to life after being numb for so long that you had forgotten what sensation felt like. It was overwhelming and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Deborah arrived at 5:30. She walked in, took one look at Clara, and burst into tears. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth with her hand. "Clara, oh my God." "Stop it," Clara said, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. The muscles in her face felt strange, almost sore, as if they were being used after a long hibernation. You look like a movie star," Deborah said, grabbing Clara's hands. "You look like someone who walks red carpets and gets photographed, and Clara, you are stunning." Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, full and surprised and a little bit wild. "I feel like a stranger," she admitted. "No," Deborah said firmly. "You feel like yourself. For the first time in years, you feel like yourself." The town car arrived at 6:15. It was sleek and black, and the driver opened the door for Clara as if she were someone important. She slid into the back seat and felt the leather cool and smooth, and for a moment she thought of all the rides she had taken in her old car, with the cracked windshield and the check engine light and the passenger seat covered in napkins and drive-through bags. The contrast was so extreme it felt like fiction, like someone else's story. The Morrison Gala was held at the Drake Hotel on the Magnificent Mile. As the car pulled up, Clara could see the entrance. A red carpet, actual photographers, men in tuxedos and women in gowns streaming through the doors. Her hands began to tremble. "I can't do this," she said to Deborah, who was sitting beside her. "Deborah, I can't." Deborah took her hand and squeezed it. "You can, and you will, because you deserve to be here. You deserve one night where you are not folding someone else's laundry or pouring someone else's coffee. You deserve one night where you are Clara. Just Clara." Clara took a breath, then another. Then she opened the car door and stepped out. The lobby of the Drake Hotel was marble and crystal and soft golden light. There were enormous flower arrangements on every surface, white roses, white lilies, green eucalyptus. The air smelled like perfume and expensive wine. A string quartet was playing somewhere in the background, and the murmur of 300 voices created a warm, enveloping hum that was nothing like the clatter and shout of the diner. Clara walked through the lobby with Deborah at her side, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and she held her head up. Not because she felt confident, but because Lucia had told her, during the fitting, "The dress does not make the woman makes the dress, and the way a woman makes a dress is by standing tall, shoulders back, chin up. Let the dress fall around you like it was made for you." Because tonight, it was. They entered the ballroom. And this is where the story changes. The Morrison Gala ballroom was a vast, glittering space with crystal chandeliers, round tables draped in white linen, and a dance floor that reflected the light like still water. There were ice sculptures. There were waiters carrying silver trays of champagne. There were people, so many people, in clothing that probably cost more than Clara's annual income. And for a moment, Clara froze. She stood at the entrance to the ballroom, one hand on Deborah's arm, and she froze because the gap between this world and her world was so enormous that her mind could not bridge it. She felt like a fraud. She felt like someone was going to look at her and know that she spent her days folding towels and pouring coffee, know that she went home to a one-bedroom apartment with a broken lock and a water stain on the ceiling, know that she was nobody. But nobody looked at her that way. Because what Clara did not realize, what she could not see from inside her own skin, was that she looked extraordinary. The midnight blue dress caught the light of the chandeliers and shimmered like deep water. Her hair, freshly cut and styled, framed her face in a way that drew attention to those remarkable grey eyes. Her posture, straightened by Lucia's advice, gave her an air of quiet elegance that stood out in a room full of people trying too hard. Clara Jennings did not look like a woman who folded laundry for a living. She looked like a woman who had a story, a deep, interesting, complicated story, and that was more compelling than any designer label in the room. And across that room, standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, Vincent Moretti saw her walk in. He had been waiting. He had positioned himself where he could see the entrance. He had told himself it was curiosity. He simply wanted to see if the plan had worked, if the dress and the salon and the car had been enough to get her through the door. But the moment she appeared, Vincent knew it was more than curiosity. Something in his chest, that low grey sky, shifted again. Not cleared, not yet, but shifted, the way a sky shifts when the first break in the clouds appears and you realize that the sun has been there the whole time, just waiting. She was beautiful. Not in the obvious, polished way of the other women in the room who had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours constructing their appearance. Clara's beauty was raw and real and almost painful to look at, because it was the beauty of a person who did not know she possessed it. It was the beauty of resilience, of endurance, of a spirit that had been beaten down and starved and ignored and had somehow, impossibly survived. Vincent set his glass down on the bar. He straightened his tie, a simple black silk tie against a charcoal suit. He had not felt nervous in 20 years, but he felt something now. Something that was not quite nervousness, but was close to it. Something that lived in the same neighborhood. "Tommy," he said. Tommy, who was standing 2 steps behind him as always, leaned in. "Boss? The flowers on her table, make sure they're fresh." Tommy looked at him. "They were set up 2 hours ago, boss. They're fresh." Vincent paused. "Make sure they're perfect." Tommy nodded and disappeared. Clara and Deborah found their table. It was near the center of the room, not at the edges where the less important guests were seated, but close to the dance floor, close to the stage, close to the heart of the event. Clara sat down and immediately reached for a glass of water because her mouth was so dry she could barely swallow. Deborah was already scanning the room with the excitement of someone who had been looking forward to this night for months. "Do you see that woman over there?" Deborah whispered, leaning close to Clara. "That's Margaret Morrison herself. She runs the whole foundation. And that man next to her, I think that's the mayor's chief of staff. Clara, we are in the room." Clara nodded, but she was not looking at Margaret Morrison or the chief of staff. She was looking at the centerpiece on their table, a stunning arrangement of white roses and deep blue hydrangeas. And she was thinking about how the last flowers she had received had been from Gerald on their 10th anniversary, a gas station bouquet of dyed carnations that he had clearly bought on the way home. She remembered thanking him for them. She remembered putting them in a glass because they did not own a vase. She remembered them wilting 3 days later, petals falling on the kitchen counter like little pink surrender flags. She touched one of the rose petals now. It was soft, real, perfect. "Those are beautiful," she said quietly. "You're beautiful," Deborah replied, and she meant it. Dinner was served at 7:30. 4 courses, a butternut squash soup, a winter salad with pomegranate and goat cheese, a fillet of salmon with lemon dill sauce, and a chocolate torte that was so rich Clara had to close her eyes while eating it. She had not eaten food like this in years. She had not sat at a table with cloth napkins and real silverware and candles in years. She had not been served in years. The simple act of someone placing a plate in front of her, carefully, respectfully, as if she mattered. It undid something inside her. At the table with Clara and Deborah were 6 other people. A couple in their 60s who owned an art gallery in River North, a young lawyer who worked in non-profit advocacy, a woman who ran a literacy program on the West Side, and a man named Paul, early 50s, kind eyes, who was a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. They were all friendly, they were all warm, and they all, without exception, were drawn to Clara. Not because of the dress, although the dress was beautiful, not because of the hair or the makeup, although both were stunning. They were drawn to her because Clara, stripped of her armor of invisibility, turned out to be someone remarkable. She was funny. That surprised even her. When Paul the surgeon asked her what she did, she panicked for a moment, then said with a small smile, "I'm in textiles and food service," which made Paul laugh so hard he nearly choked on his soup. When the gallery owner mentioned that modern art was all about disruption, Clara said, "I work at a laundromat. Believe me, I know all about disruption. Nothing disrupts your day quite like someone leaving a red sock in with the white load." The table erupted. Deborah stared at Clara as if she were seeing a ghost. The ghost of the woman Clara had been before Gerald, before the divorce, before the hollowing out. This Clara was sharp and warm and present, and she was emerging like a creature that had been hibernating underground for years, blinking in the sudden light. And through all of this, from across the room, Vincent Moretti watched. He did not approach, not during the soup, not during the salad, not during the salmon. He watched and he waited, because Vincent understood something fundamental about people who had been broken. You did not rush them. You did not overwhelm them. You let them come back to themselves at their own pace, and you made sure the space around them was safe enough for that to happen. But after dinner, when the music started and the dance floor began to fill, Vincent made his move. He walked across the ballroom with the unhurried confidence of a man who had spent his entire life entering rooms and commanding them without raising his voice. People stepped aside for him, not dramatically, not fearfully, but with the unconscious deference that power commands. He reached Clara's table, and he stopped. Clara looked up, and for a moment The two of them simply looked at each other, grey eyes meeting dark brown eyes. A woman who had lost everything meeting a man who had everything and had learned that it meant nothing without someone to share it with. "Good evening," Vincent said. His voice was low and warm, with just a trace of Italian accent that time had not fully eroded. "My name is Vincent. I couldn't help but notice you across the room, and I wanted to say, you have the most genuine smile I've seen in this building tonight, and I've been watching everyone." Clara blinked. She was not used to compliments. She was not used to being noticed. She felt the old instinct rising, the instinct to deflect, to diminish, to make herself smaller. But something about this man's eyes, the directness, the warmth, the absolute absence of pretense, made her pause. "Thank you," she said. And then, surprising herself, "I wasn't sure I still knew how to smile." Vincent tilted his head slightly. "Some things you don't forget. They just need to be reminded." He pulled out the empty chair next to her. "May I?" Clara looked at Deborah, who was watching this exchange with her mouth slightly open. Deborah nodded vigorously. Clara turned back to Vincent. "Please." Vincent sat down. Up close, Clara could see the details of him, the fine lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples, the quiet strength in his hands as he folded them on the table. He did not look like the other men at this party, who all seemed to be performing their wealth and status like actors on a stage. Vincent looked like a man who had stopped performing a long time ago, who had decided that he would simply be who he was, and the world could adjust. "So tell me," Vincent said, leaning slightly forward, "how did you end up here tonight? You don't strike me as a regular at these things." Clara laughed, that real laugh again, the one that felt like a muscle memory returning. "I am definitely not a regular at these things. My friend Deborah brought me. She basically kidnapped me, honestly. I was planning to spend tonight eating leftover soup and watching home renovation shows." Vincent's eyes crinkled. Home renovation shows? My wife used to love those. She would watch them for hours and then give me a list of everything she wanted changed in the house. "Used to?" Clara asked gently. A shadow crossed Vincent's face, brief, controlled. But Clara saw it, because Clara was someone who had spent years becoming invisible, and invisible people learn to see everything. "She passed away," Vincent said, 12 years ago. "I'm sorry," Clara said. And she meant it in a way that went beyond polite condolence, because she understood loss. Not the same loss, not the same magnitude, but the fundamental experience of having your life divided into before and after. "Don't be sorry," Vincent said. "She wouldn't want that. She would want me to be sitting here talking to an interesting woman at a party instead of standing in the corner drinking water and intimidating everyone." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Do you intimidate people?" Vincent considered this. "Sometimes. Unintentionally, mostly." "You don't intimidate me," Clara said. And she was surprised to find that it was true. "Good," Vincent said. "Then maybe you'll tell me what you were like before tonight, before the dress and the party and the champagne. Who is Clara when she's not here?" The question hit Clara like a wave, not because it was intrusive, but because it was the question she had been avoiding for years. Who was she? Not the woman Gerald had left, not the woman who folded laundry and poured coffee, not the woman with the water stain on her ceiling and the broken lock on her door. Who was she, underneath all of that? She looked at Vincent, and something about his steady, patient gaze gave her permission to answer honestly. "I don't know anymore," she said. "I used to know. I used to be someone who had opinions and plans and things she cared about. I was a librarian before I got married. Did you know that? I had a degree in library science. I loved books. I loved organizing things, making sense of chaos. I was good at it. And then I got married, and my husband wanted me to stay home. And I did, because I thought that was what marriage meant. And then he left, and I had no career, no savings, no identity beyond being someone's wife. And now I fold other people's towels, and I pour other people's coffee, and I come home to an apartment that smells like old chemicals, and I think, how did I get here? How did I become this person?" She stopped. She had not meant to say all of that. She had not meant to say any of that. But the words had come out like water from a broken pipe, unstoppable once the crack appeared. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what I hear when you tell me that story?" "What?" "I hear someone who sacrificed herself for someone who didn't deserve it. And I hear someone who is angry about that, but has turned the anger inward instead of outward. And I hear someone who thinks she is broken, but she's not broken. She's just been put on a shelf and forgotten. And shelves are not permanent. Things can be taken off shelves." Clara stared at him. Her eyes were burning, but she did not blink because she did not want to miss whatever this man was going to say next. "You were a librarian," Vincent said. "You loved books. You loved making sense of chaos. Do you know what that tells me? That tells me you are someone who looks at a mess and sees the possibility of order. That is a rare and valuable quality, and the fact that your life is a mess right now does not mean you've lost that quality. It means you haven't had the chance to use it on yourself yet. If you're feeling this story right now, if Clara's journey is hitting you somewhere deep, drop a comment below, just write, "Everyone deserves a second chance." I want to see how many of you believe that, because what happens next in this story will test that belief to its core. The music changed. The string quartet was replaced by a small jazz ensemble, piano, bass, saxophone, drums. They played a slow, swinging melody that wrapped around the room like warm arms. Couples moved to the dance floor, their silhouettes reflected in the polished wood. Vincent stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me." Clara looked at his hand. It was steady, unhurried, offered without pressure. She thought about saying no. She thought about all the reasons she should say no. She didn't know how to dance. She hadn't danced in years. She would step on his feet. She would embarrass herself. She didn't deserve this. None of this was real. But then she thought about what Lucia had said. "Some gifts you simply accept." She took his hand. They walked to the dance floor. Vincent placed his right hand on her waist, gently but with confidence, and took her left hand in his. Clara's right hand went to his shoulder, and she was surprised by how solid he felt, not just physically but in some deeper sense, like he was a structure that had been built to withstand storms. "I should warn you," Clara said. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither does anyone else," Vincent said. "They're all just moving and hoping it looks intentional." Clara laughed and they began to dance. It was not graceful, not at first. Clara was stiff, conscious of her feet, conscious of the eyes she imagined were watching her. But Vincent led with a quiet authority that made it easy to follow. And after a few minutes, Clara's body began to relax. She stopped counting steps. She stopped worrying about her feet. She let the music do what music does, bypass the brain and speak directly to the body, directly to the heart. And something happened on that dance floor, something that 300 people witnessed and would talk about for months afterward. Clara Jennings began to glow. Not literally. There was no spotlight, no special lighting effect. But the woman who had walked into that ballroom looking beautiful and uncertain began to radiate something that went beyond beauty. It was joy, raw, unexpected, almost dangerous joy. The kind that comes from thawing after a long freeze, from discovering that you are not dead inside, that you can still feel, that the world can still surprise you. People noticed. They could not help but notice. Conversations at nearby tables trailed off as heads turned toward the dance floor. The young lawyer put down his champagne glass and watched. The gallery owners stopped debating abstract expressionism and stared. Even Margaret Morrison, the formidable woman who ran the entire foundation, paused mid-sentence and looked, because Clara was not just dancing. Clara was coming, alive. Her smile, that smile Vincent had noticed across the room, was now luminous. Her eyes were bright with tears that she was too happy to feel embarrassed about. She moved with a freedom that was startling in its intensity, because it was the freedom of someone who had been caged for years and had just realized the door had been open the whole time. Vincent saw it. He saw the transformation happening in real time, and he felt something he had not felt in 12 years, since the last time. Maria had looked at him across a room and smiled in a way that made the rest of the world irrelevant. He felt hope. The song ended. Another began. They kept dancing. Clara did not want to stop, and Vincent did not suggest it. They danced through 3 songs, and by the third, Clara's head was resting lightly against Vincent's shoulder, and she was not thinking about the laundromat or the diner or the water stain on her ceiling or Gerald or the divorce or any of it. She was thinking about how good it felt to be held, how good it felt to move, how good it felt to be alive. When they finally returned to the table, Deborah was sitting there with mascara streaked down both cheeks and a look on her face that was half joy and half disbelief. She grabbed Clara's hand and squeezed it so hard Clara winced. "Who was that woman on the dance floor?" Deborah whispered. Clara smiled. "I think it was me." The party continued. Vincent stayed at Clara's table for the rest of the evening. They talked about books. He was surprisingly well read, with a particular love for Italian poetry and American crime fiction, which made Clara laugh. They talked about Chicago, about the neighborhoods they loved, the restaurants they missed, the way the city looked in winter when the snow covered the grime and made everything look clean and new. They talked about loss and resilience and the strange, humbling experience of starting over. And through it all, Vincent was careful. He was attentive without being overwhelming. He was present without being possessive. He asked questions and listened, truly listened, to the answers, which was something Clara had not experienced from a man in so long that she had forgotten it was possible. At 10:30, the gala began to wind down. The jazz ensemble played their final set. Dessert had been served and cleared. People were gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes. Vincent walked Clara and Deborah to the lobby, where the town car was waiting. "I had a wonderful evening," Vincent said to Clara. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a business card. Simple, cream-colored, with just his name and a phone number. No title, no company, just Vincent Moretti. "If you ever want to talk about books or dance or just have a cup of coffee with someone who thinks you're remarkable, call me." Clara took the card. She looked at it, then looked at him. "Vincent, I don't understand why you came to talk to me tonight. In a room full of all those people, why me?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I looked across the room and I saw someone who reminded me of someone I lost. Not in appearance, in spirit. My wife was a woman who gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left for herself, and the world took advantage of that generosity. I see the same thing in you. And I decided, a long time ago, that when I see that, I'm going to do something about it. Even if it's just one night. Even if it's just a dance." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the business card in her hand. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the dance, for seeing me." Vincent nodded once. "Good night, Clara." He watched the town car pull away from the Drake Hotel and disappear into the Chicago night. Tommy materialized beside him. "That went well, boss," Tommy said. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Make sure her rent is paid through the end of the year, anonymously, and find out if there are any job openings at the public library system. I want to know by Monday." Tommy pulled out his notebook. "Yes, sir." Vincent turned and walked back into the hotel. For the first time in 12 years, the sky inside his chest felt a little lighter. But this is not where the story ends. If anything, this is where the story truly begins. Because what happened next, what happened in the days and weeks after that party, was something neither Clara nor Vincent could have predicted. It involved secrets, revelations, a confrontation that shook Vincent's organization to its core, and a choice that Clara would have to make, a choice that would determine whether her transformation was real or just a beautiful illusion that would fade like the last notes of a jazz song in an empty ballroom. Clara did not call Vincent on Sunday. She did not call him on Monday. She held the business card in her hand each night before bed, turning it over, running her thumb across the embossed letters, and then setting it on her nightstand beside the alarm clock that went off at 5:30. She was afraid, not of Vincent. She was not afraid of him, which surprised her. She was afraid of what calling him would mean. It would mean admitting that she wanted something. It would mean admitting that she was not okay with her life the way it was. It would mean cracking open a door that she had sealed shut 3 years ago, and she did not know what would come flooding through if she did. On Tuesday, something happened that made the decision for her. Clara was at the laundromat, folding a basket of someone's dress shirts, white, starched, expensive, the kind of shirts Gerald used to wear, when her phone buzzed. It was an email. She almost ignored it because 90% of her emails were spam or overdue notices, but something made her glance at the screen. The subject line read, "Application received, Chicago Public Library System." Clara stared at the phone. She had not applied to the Chicago Public Library System. She had not applied for any job. She opened the email and read it twice. It was a confirmation that her resume had been received for a position as a reference librarian at the Harold Washington Library Center downtown. The email included a date and time for an interview, Thursday at 2 o'clock. Clara's first reaction was confusion. Her second reaction was a slow, dawning realization. She looked at the business card in her wallet. She had started carrying it with her, though she would not have admitted it, and she understood. Vincent. It had to be Vincent. Somehow he had submitted her resume. Somehow he had known about her background, her degree, her love of books. The thought should have made her angry. Someone had made a decision about her life without asking her. Someone had pulled strings, manipulated things, taken control. But Clara did not feel angry. She felt seen. Again. She felt like someone had looked at her life and said, "This is not where you belong," and had done something about it. She called Vincent that afternoon from the break room of the laundromat, sitting on an overturned milk crate with her apron still on and the smell of detergent all around her. "I got an interview," she said when he answered. "I heard," Vincent said. His voice was warm. "Did you do this?" A pause. "I made a phone call. The interview is real. The job is real. Whether you get it is entirely up to you." "Vincent, you can't just arrange things in my life without telling me." "You're right, I apologize, but I'm not sorry." Clara was quiet. Then she laughed. It was becoming easier to laugh, she noticed. The muscles were loosening. "That doesn't even make sense." "It makes perfect sense. I apologize for overstepping, but I'm not sorry that you have an interview at the library where you belong. Both things can be true." Clara leaned back against the wall of the break room. Through the door, she could hear the tumble of dryers and the hiss of steam. "I haven't been in a library in 3 years. I don't even know if I remember how to—" "You remember," Vincent said. "You remember everything. You just need someone to believe that. And since you don't believe it yet, I'll believe it for you until you catch up." Clara closed her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I'm a man who eats lunch at the same restaurant every day and reads the newspaper with glasses he's too vain to wear in public. I'm nobody special, Clara. But I know talent when I see it, and I know waste when I see it, and you working in a laundromat is waste." The interview was on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Clara spent Wednesday night in a state of near panic. She did not own professional clothes. The dress from the gala was far too formal, and everything else she owned was either worn thin or stained. She was about to call Deborah when there was a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find a garment bag hanging from the doorknob and a small card that read, "For Thursday, you'll be wonderful, LD. Lucia DeLuca." Clara unzipped the bag and found a simple, elegant outfit. Charcoal grey slacks, a soft cream blouse, a fitted blazer. Professional, polished, perfect. And in a separate bag, a pair of low-heeled black shoes. Clara held the blazer up and pressed her face into the fabric and cried, not because she was sad, because someone she barely knew had taken the time to think about what she needed and had provided it without being asked. The kindness was almost unbearable. After years of being treated as though she did not exist, each small act of care felt like a drop of water on parched earth, absorbed instantly, desperately, gratefully. Thursday came. Clara put on the outfit, styled her hair the way Gina had shown her, applied the minimal makeup she had learned during the salon visit, and took the bus downtown to the Harold Washington Library Center. The building was massive, a postmodern fortress of red brick and glass that took up an entire city block. Clara had been here before years ago when she was a student. She remembered the winter garden on the top floor with its soaring glass ceiling and the olive trees growing inside. She remembered the smell of the stacks, that particular combination of paper, binding glue and old wood that was unlike any other smell in the world. Walking through those doors again felt like walking into a memory of who she used to be. The interview was conducted by a woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor, the head of reference services. She was tall, composed, with short natural hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made her look both scholarly and approachable. She shook Clara's hand firmly and led her to a small conference room on the third floor. "Ms. Jennings," Dr. Okafor began, glancing at a folder in front of her. "Your resume is impressive. Degree in Library Science from the University of Illinois. 3 years of reference work at the Evanston Public Library. Before your career break, strong recommendations from former colleagues." She looked up. "Can you tell me about the gap in your employment?" Clara took a breath. She had rehearsed this answer, a polished, professional explanation about personal circumstances and career refocusing, but sitting in that room in the building that smelled like books and possibility, she decided to tell the truth. "I got married," she said. "My husband wanted me to stay home, and I did. Then he left, and I found myself with no career and no confidence and no plan. I've been working service jobs for the past 3 years. Laundromat, diner. I lost track of who I was, and then very recently someone reminded me." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend that there isn't a gap. There is. But the knowledge is still there, the passion is still there, and I promise you, if you give me this chance, I will work harder than anyone you've ever hired, because I know what it feels like to lose something you love. And I will never take it for granted again." Dr. Okafor studied her for a long moment, then she smiled. "Miss Jennings, can I be honest with you? Please. I've conducted over 200 interviews for this library. I have never had a candidate answer that question the way you just did. Most people dodge it or dress it up. You told me the truth, and you told me what the truth taught you. That's rare." She closed the folder. "The position starts in 2 weeks. Salary is modest, but includes benefits. Can you start January 7th? Clara's eyes went wide. Yes, I can start January 7th. "Then welcome to the Harold Washington Library, Ms. Jennings." Clara walked out of the library into the cold December air and stood on the sidewalk on State Street, and she tipped her face up toward the gray sky and she breathed. Just breathed. Deep, full, shuddering breaths of cold air that tasted like freedom. She had a job, a real job, a job that used her mind and her education and her love of books and order and knowledge. She stood there on the sidewalk with people streaming past her in both directions, and she cried, and she did not care who saw. She called Vincent from the sidewalk. He answered on the second ring. "I got the job," she said. There was a pause, then, "Of course you did." "Vincent, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You walked into that interview and you impressed them. That was you, Clara, not me. I just opened a door. You're the one. Who walked through it?" Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can I buy you a cup of coffee? I know you drink espresso, but I can't afford espresso, so you'll have to settle for regular coffee." Vincent laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full and warm, and it was the first time Clara had heard it. "I would love a cup of coffee." They met on Friday afternoon at a small coffee shop on Dearborn Street. A quiet place with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs, and a barista who took his craft very seriously. Clara arrived first and ordered a regular coffee, black because she had learned to drink it without cream or sugar at the diner, where every penny counted. Vincent arrived 5 minutes later, wearing his dark overcoat and a scarf. He ordered an espresso, which made Clara smile. "I thought I said I couldn't afford espresso," she said. "You're buying the coffee," Vincent said. "I'm buying the espresso." They sat by the window, and the winter light fell across the table in pale rectangles, and they talked. This time without the formality of the gala, without the champagne and the chandeliers, and the 300 other people, the conversation went deeper. Clara asked Vincent about his wife, and he told her about Maria, how they had met at a church festival in the old neighborhood, how she had been the only woman who was not afraid of him, how she had made him promise, on her deathbed, that he would not let her passing turn him into someone she would not recognize. "Have you kept that promise?" Clara asked. Vincent looked at his espresso cup. "Most days. Some days are harder than others." Clara nodded. She understood that. "Can I ask you something? Anything? The night of the party, the dress, the salon, the car. You arranged all of that, didn't you?" Vincent met her eyes. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I saw you through the window of that diner, and I recognized something. The look on your face, the way you carried yourself, like someone who had decided that this was all there was going to be. And I know that look, Clara, because I've worn it. After Maria died, I wore it for years. And someone, an old friend, pulled me out of it. Not by giving me money or power or anything material, by simply refusing to let me disappear, by showing up, by insisting that I was still alive and that being alive meant something. I wanted to do that for you. But you don't even know me. I know enough. I know you have gray eyes like winter sky. I know you were a librarian who loved making sense of chaos. I know you make people laugh at dinner parties with jokes about laundry. And I know you deserved better than what life gave you. That's enough to start." Clara looked at this man, this powerful, quiet, complicated man, and she felt something open inside her chest. Not romantic love, not yet, though the seeds were there. Something more fundamental. Trust. For the first time in years, she trusted someone. She trusted that his kindness was real, that his interest was genuine, that he was not going to disappear one Tuesday morning with a suitcase and a confession. But what Clara did not know, what she could not know yet, was that Vincent Moretti was a man with a complicated past and an even more complicated present, and the world he inhabited, the world of power and secrecy and unspoken rules, was about to collide with her fragile new beginning in a way that would test everything she had just started to rebuild. It began the following week. Clara gave her 2 weeks' notice at both the laundromat and the diner. Her boss at the laundromat, a gruff man named Harold, just shrugged and said he would find a replacement. But her boss at the diner, a woman named Margie, who had been running the place for 20 years, looked at Clara with something like surprise and said, "You know, Jennings, I always figured you were smarter than this place. Good for you." Clara spent the week before her new job started doing something she hadn't done in years, preparing. She went to the library, not the Harold Washington, but a branch library near her apartment, and checked out books on current trends in library science, digital cataloging systems, and community programming. She sat in her apartment at night and read, and the feeling of a book in her hands, the weight and the texture and the smell of the pages, brought back memories so vivid they were almost physical. She remembered sitting in the stacks at the University of Illinois surrounded by books, feeling like she was in the safest place in the world. She remembered the satisfaction of helping a patron find exactly the right book for exactly the right moment in their life. She remembered being good at something. She and Vincent talked on the phone every evening that week. Their conversations lasted hours, long, wandering discussions that covered everything from favorite novels to childhood memories to the best deep dish pizza in Chicago. They disagreed. Vincent was loyal to Lou Malnati's, while Clara swore by Giordano's and neither would budge. These conversations became the highlight of Clara's day, and she found herself looking at the clock in the afternoons, counting the hours until evening, until she could hear his voice. On Saturday, Vincent invited her to dinner at Vecchio's. "It's my restaurant," he said. "Well, I own it, but the chef does all the work. Best Italian food in the city." Clara dressed carefully, not in the gala dress, but in a simple black sweater, jeans, and the low-heeled shoes Lucia had given her. She applied a little makeup, styled her hair, and looked at herself in the mirror. And for the first time she liked what she saw. Not because she looked different, but because the woman in the mirror was looking back at her with something in her eyes that had been missing for years. Hope. Vecchio's was warm and crowded, and smelled like garlic and fresh bread and simmering tomato sauce. The walls were covered with old photographs of families, Italian families going back generations. Candles flickered on every table. Dean Martin was playing softly from speakers hidden among the exposed brick. Vincent was waiting at his corner table, and he stood when she walked in, and the look on his face, that brief, unguarded moment of pleasure, told Clara something she needed to know. He was not just being kind. He was not just performing charity. He was glad to see her. Genuinely, personally glad. Dinner was extraordinary. Vincent ordered for both of them, not presumptuously, but because he knew every dish on the menu and wanted to share his favorites. They started with bruschetta and fried calamari, then homemade pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu, then veal piccata with lemon and capers, and finally a tiramisu that was so perfect, Clara put down her spoon and said, "If I die right now, I will die happy, and it will be because of this dessert." Vincent laughed. "My mother used to say that food is the language God speaks when words are not enough. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. She was also terrifying. 5 feet tall, and she could silence a room with a look. My father, who was not a small man, was afraid of her. Clara smiled. "I would have liked her. She would have liked you. She always liked women with backbone. I don't feel like I have much backbone." Vincent set down his fork and looked at her. "Clara, 3 weeks ago, you were working 2 jobs, eating leftovers, standing up, and convinced that your life was over. Today you're sitting here, you have a new job that uses your education, and you're making me laugh, which is something very few people manage to do. If that's not backbone, I don't know what is." Clara looked down at her plate. "You make it sound easier than it was." "Nothing about what you've done was easy. That's exactly my point." After dinner, Vincent walked her outside. The night was cold and clear, and the stars were sharp. Above the city lights, their breath made small clouds in the air. Vincent turned to Clara, and his face was serious in a way it hadn't been all evening. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you. Something about who I am." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Okay." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, as if he were deciding something. Then he said, "I am not just a restaurant owner. I have business interests that are complex. I come from a family with a certain reputation in this city, a reputation that is not entirely undeserved." Clara was quiet. She was not naive. She had grown up on the south side of Chicago. She knew what family with a certain reputation meant. "Are you telling me you're in the—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "I'm telling you that my life is not simple," Vincent said carefully. "And I'm telling you because I respect you too much to let you develop feelings for someone you don't fully understand. You deserve the truth, Clara. Always." Clara stood on the sidewalk outside Vecchio's, and the cold bit at her cheeks. And she looked at this man who had pulled her from the edge of disappearing, who had given her back her smile and her career and her sense of self. And she felt the ground shift under her feet. Not collapse, shift, like an earthquake that changes the landscape but doesn't destroy it. "I appreciate you telling me," she said slowly. "Does it change things?" Clara thought about this. She thought about Gerald, who had been a perfectly respectable man with a perfectly respectable job, who had lied to her for 4 years. She thought about all the normal people who had looked through her as if she were invisible, and she thought about Vincent, who had seen her through a diner window and decided she deserved more. "It changes some things," she said. "It doesn't change how I feel about you, but it scares me. Not because of you, because of what it might mean for this. Whatever this is." Vincent nodded. "I understand. And I want you to take time. Think about it. There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere." Clara reached out and took his hand. It was warm despite the cold, and she held it for a moment, feeling the strength in it, the steadiness. "Thank you for telling me." "Thank you for not running," Vincent said. And in his voice, Clara heard something she had not expected. Vulnerability. This powerful, feared man was afraid. Afraid of being rejected. afraid of being alone again. She squeezed his hand. "I'm not running, I'm just processing." Vincent smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Take your time." Clara started her new job on January 7th. She arrived at the Harold Washington Library Center at 8 o'clock in the morning, 45 minutes early, wearing the charcoal blazer and cream blouse from Lucia. She stood in the lobby, looking up at the soaring ceiling, and she took a moment to feel it. The weight of the moment, the significance of it. This was not just a new job, this was a reclamation. She was reclaiming the person she had been before Gerald, before the divorce, before the years of invisibility. She was saying to the world, "I am still here, I am still capable, I am still someone worth knowing." Dr. Okafor met her at the reference desk on the second floor and spent the morning walking her through the systems, the collections, the programs. Clara absorbed everything with a hunger that surprised even her. It was like drinking water after years of thirst. The Dewey Decimal System, the digital catalogue, the interlibrary loan system, the community outreach programs, the children's reading hour, the book club for seniors, every detail, every system, every procedure. Clara learned it as if her life depended on it, because in a very real sense it did. By the end of her first week, Dr. Okafor called Clara into her office and said, "Miss Jennings, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have never seen anyone pick things up as quickly as you have. You have a gift for this work." Clara's eyes stung. "Thank you, Dr. Okafor. You have no idea what this job means to me." "I think I do," Dr. Okafor said gently, "and I want you to know, you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Clara threw herself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She reorganized the reference section's filing system within her first month, a task that had been on the to-do list for 2 years. She started a book recommendation program called Next Read, where patrons could fill out a short questionnaire about their interests and receive personalized reading lists, an idea she had pitched to Dr. Okafor during her second week, and which Dr. Okafor had approved with enthusiasm. She volunteered for extra shifts. She stayed late to help with community events. She arrived early to shelve returns. She was not just working, she was rebuilding herself, brick by brick, book by book, and through it all she and Vincent continued to grow closer. They had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at Vecchio's, sometimes at other restaurants around the city, sometimes at Clara's apartment, where she cooked simple meals that Vincent declared were the best food he had ever eaten, which Clara knew was a generous exaggeration, but which made her glow nonetheless. They talked, they laughed, they argued about books. Vincent thought Hemingway was overrated. Clara thought he was exactly properly rated, and these arguments always ended in laughter, because neither of them really cared about being right. They cared about the conversation. They cared about the connection. Vincent was careful. He did not rush Clara into anything physical. He did not pressure her. He waited for her to set the pace, and Clara, who had forgotten what it felt like to be respected, fell in love with him incrementally, the way you fall into a warm bath, slowly, deliberately, with each degree of heat bringing a new wave of comfort. But the world Vincent inhabited was not a warm bath. It was cold and sharp and dangerous, and it was about to intrude on Clara's new life in a way she could not have anticipated. It started with a man named Rico Salvestri. Rico was Vincent's second-in-command, a position he had held for 15 years. He was 47, sharp-featured, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Rico was efficient, ruthless, and loyal, or at least he had always appeared loyal. He managed the day-to-day operations of the Moretti organization with military precision, and Vincent trusted him more than anyone except Tommy. But Rico had been watching Vincent's transformation with growing unease. The old Vincent, the Vincent before Clara, had been focused, calculated, and fully engaged in the business. That Vincent attended every meeting, reviewed every operation, approved every decision personally. But the new Vincent, the Vincent who left meetings early to make phone calls, who spent his evenings at dinners instead of at Vecchio's back office, who had started talking about legacy and transition and other words that sounded dangerously like retirement, this Vincent made Rico nervous. Rico's nervousness was not purely professional, it was personal. He had been positioning himself for years to eventually take over the Moretti organization, and everything had been on track. Vincent was aging, Maria was gone, there were no heirs to the family. Business, and Rico had been quietly building alliances within the organization, strengthening his position, making himself indispensable. The last thing he needed was Vincent finding a new reason to stay engaged, a new person to care about, a new source of energy and purpose. Clara was a threat, not because she was dangerous in any conventional sense, but because she made Vincent happy. And a happy Vincent was a Vincent who might not step aside. A happy Vincent was a Vincent who might decide to hold the reins for another 10, 15, 20 years. Rico could not afford to wait that long. So Rico began to investigate Clara, not through official channels, not through Tommy. He knew Tommy's loyalty to Vincent was absolute and unwavering. Rico used his own people. Men who asked questions in bars and laundromats and diners, men who pulled public records and court documents and credit reports. And what Rico found, or rather, what Rico assembled from the facts he found, was a narrative. Narrative that, presented correctly, could destroy Vincent's trust in Clara and end their relationship. The narrative was this: Clara Jennings was not an innocent woman rescued from poverty by a generous benefactor. Clara Jennings was a woman who had been married to Gerald Jennings, a mid-level financial consultant. Gerald Jennings had clients. Some of those clients had connections to organized crime, not to the Moretti family, but to a rival organization, the Petrov Group, a network of Eastern, European businessmen who had been encroaching on Moretti territory for the past 5 years. Rico's theory was that Clara had been planted near Vecchio's deliberately, that her presence at the diner on Halsted Street, on Vincent's route home, was not a coincidence but a calculated move by the Petrovs to get close to Vincent through an unsuspecting pawn. It was, of course, absurd. Clara had no connection to the Petrovs. Gerald's clients had been ordinary businessmen with ordinary investments, and the fact that one or two of them had tangential connections to Eastern European business networks was the kind of 6 degrees of separation coincidence that means nothing in the real world, but everything in the paranoid world of organized crime. But Rico did not care about the truth. He cared about the narrative, and the narrative was plausible enough to plant a seed of doubt. Rico chose his moment carefully. It was a Tuesday evening in late January. Vincent was at Vecchio's, finishing his espresso, reviewing the accounts that Rico presented to him each week. Tommy was in the front of the restaurant, overseeing the dinner service. They were alone in the back office. "Boss," Rico said, his voice casual, controlled. "I need to show you something." He placed a folder on the table. Inside was a stack of documents, Gerald Jennings's client lists, corporate registrations, a chart showing connections between Gerald's clients and known associates of the Petrov Group. The connections were thin, circumstantial, and in any legitimate investigation would have been dismissed as coincidence. But Rico had arranged them carefully, drawing lines and highlighting names in a way that created a visual impression of conspiracy. Vincent looked at the documents. He looked at them for a long time, his face unreadable. "What am I looking at?" he said. Rico leaned forward. Her ex-husband had ties to the Petrovs. Not direct ties. He probably didn't even know. But someone in that network knew about Clara, knew where she worked, knew your route home. "Boss, I'm not saying she's in on it. I'm saying someone put her there." Vincent's eyes moved from the documents to Rico's face, and for a moment, something dangerous flickered in those dark brown eyes. Not anger at Clara, but something else. Something that Rico, in his arrogance, failed to recognize. Suspicion, but not the kind of suspicion Rico intended. Vincent was not suspicious of Clara. Vincent was suspicious of Rico. Because Vincent Moretti had survived 63 years in a world where betrayal was as common as breakfast, and he had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect it. And something about this, the timing, the presentation, the folder placed so casually on the table, felt wrong. It felt manufactured. It felt like someone was trying to drive a wedge between him and the one source of genuine happiness he had found in 12 years. But Vincent did not react. He did not challenge Rico. He did not reveal his suspicions. He simply closed the folder, set it aside, and said, "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll look into it." Rico nodded, satisfied. "I just want to keep you safe, boss." "I know," Vincent said. But what he meant was, "I know exactly what you want." That night, Vincent sat alone in his study at home, a large room lined with bookshelves that Maria had filled during their years together. He sat in his leather chair and he thought. He thought about Clara, about her, grey eyes and her genuine laugh and the way she had said, "I'm not running." He thought about Maria, about the promise he had made to her, and he thought about Rico, about the 15 years of loyalty that might have been something else entirely. He picked up the phone and called Tommy. "I need you to look into something," Vincent said. "Not Clara, Rico." Tommy was silent for a beat. "How deep?" "As deep as you need to go." What Tommy found, over the course of the next 10 days, was damning. Rico had been skimming from the organization for 3 years. Small amounts, carefully disguised but consistent. He had been meeting privately with members of the Petrov group, not as adversaries, but as potential allies. He had been building a shadow network within the Moretti organization, cultivating loyalty among younger members who were ambitious enough to see Rico's eventual takeover as their own opportunity for advancement. And he had fabricated the connection between Clara and the Petrovs entirely. Gerald Jennings's clients had no meaningful connection to organized crime of any kind. Rico had cherry-picked data, exaggerated associations, and constructed a false narrative designed to separate Vincent from the woman he was falling in love with. Vincent absorbed this information the way he absorbed everything, quietly, completely, without visible emotion. But inside, the sky was darkening, not the old grey sky of grief, a different kind of sky, the sky that preceded a storm. Clara, meanwhile, knew nothing of this. She was thriving at the library. By February, her next read program had become the most popular service in the reference department. Patrons were requesting her by name. Dr. Okafor had mentioned the possibility of a promotion within the year. Clara was eating 3 meals a day now, buying groceries, cooking real food. She had fixed the lock on her apartment door. The landlord, mysteriously, had finally repaired the water stain on her ceiling. Clara did not know that this was because Tommy had paid the landlord a visit and suggested, firmly but politely, that the building's maintenance issues be addressed immediately. Clara was happy. The word felt strange to her, like a pair of shoes she hadn't worn in years, tight at first, almost uncomfortable, but fitting better with each step. She was happy at work. She was happy with Deborah, who was now a regular at her apartment for Sunday dinners. And she was happy with Vincent, whose presence in her life had become as essential as breathing. But in late February, the storm broke. Vincent called Clara on a Wednesday evening. His voice was different, controlled, clipped, the voice of a man who was about to do something he could not undo. "Clara, I need to see you tonight. Can I come to your apartment?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "I'll be there at 8. He arrived at 8 o'clock exactly, and Clara knew immediately that something was wrong. His face was taut, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He sat on her couch, the same couch with the spring and the folded towel, and he told her everything. About Rico, about the fabricated connection to the Petrovs, about the skimming, the secret meetings, the shadow network, about the fact that someone in Vincent's own organization had tried to use Clara as a weapon against him. Clara listened in silence. When he finished, she sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her grey eyes fixed on his face. "Are you in danger?" she asked. "No. Rico is being dealt with. He will not be a problem after tonight." Clara flinched at the implication. "Vincent?" "He will not be harmed," Vincent said quickly, reading her expression. "He will be removed from the organization, permanently. He will leave Chicago and he will not return. I have arranged this already. And if he doesn't agree to leave?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. He will agree, because the alternative is that every person in this city who matters will know what he did. And in our world, Clara, there is nothing worse than being exposed as disloyal. He will leave because leaving is the only option that lets him keep his reputation, and his reputation is all he has. Clara exhaled. And what about us? What does this mean for us? Vincent reached across the couch and took her hand. It means that someone tried to destroy what we're building, and they failed. It means that I trust you, Clara, completely. And it means that I need to tell you something else, something I've been wanting to say for weeks. What? I love you. Clara's breath caught. She looked at this man, this complex, powerful, flawed, beautiful man, and she felt the last wall inside her crumble. Not collapse violently, not shatter. It simply dissolved, like a sandcastle meeting the tide, because it was time. Because she was ready. I love you too, she said. Vincent closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were bright with something Clara had never seen in him before. Peace. Rico Salvestri left Chicago on a Thursday morning in early March on a flight to Miami. He was accompanied to the airport by two of Vincent's most trusted men, who watched him board the plane and did not leave the terminal until the aircraft was in the air. Rico took with him a suitcase, a significant amount of money that Vincent had given him, not as a reward but as insurance against Rico doing something desperate, and the knowledge that he was never to set foot in the city again. His name was removed from every document, every record, every conversation within the Moretti organization. It was as if he had never existed. Vincent promoted Tommy to the position Rico had held. Tommy, who had been with the family for 20 years and whose loyalty was as solid as bedrock, accepted the role with a simple nod and a handshake. No ceremony, no speeches. That was not how things were done. Spring came to Chicago the way it always does, reluctantly, with false starts and cold snaps and sudden warm days that make you forget briefly what February felt like. Clara watched the city transform from her window at the Harold Washington Library, where she now had her own small office, a promotion that Dr. Okafor had pushed through ahead of schedule, citing Clara's exceptional performance and innovative programming. Clara's Next Read program had expanded. She now ran a weekly book club for adults that regularly drew 40 participants. She had started a partnership with a local school to bring children from underserved neighborhoods into the library for reading and mentorship sessions. She had pitched and received a small grant to create a series of workshops on digital literacy for seniors, which she taught personally every Thursday evening. Each of these initiatives grew from the same impulse that had made Clara a great librarian in the first place, the desire to make sense of chaos, to connect people with the knowledge and stories they needed to build order and meaning in a world that often felt random and cruel. And at home, though Clara's apartment was still the same one-bedroom unit above the closed dry cleaner, everything was different. The lock worked, the ceiling was repaired, the couch still had the spring, but Clara had bought a proper cushion to cover it, instead of the folded towel. There were books everywhere, stacked on the kitchen counter, piled on the nightstand, tucked into the cushions of the couch. There were flowers on the table, fresh ones that Vincent brought every Saturday when he came for dinner. Vincent. His name had become a rhythm in Clara's days, as constant and reassuring as a heartbeat. They had settled into a pattern. Dinners at Vecchio's on Wednesdays, dinners at Clara's apartment on Saturdays, phone calls every evening, and occasional Sunday walks along the lakefront when the weather cooperated. Vincent was patient, generous, and surprisingly domestic. He helped Clara cook, chopping vegetables with the concentrated precision of a man who applied equal focus to everything he did. He washed dishes by hand because he said the feel of warm water was therapeutic. He brought her books he found at estate sales, first editions, old poetry collections, obscure novels, and the expression on his face when she opened them was the expression of a boy giving his mother a hand-picked bouquet of dandelions. But Vincent was still Vincent. He still went to Vecchio's every day. He still ran the organization, though with a lighter touch now that Tommy was handling the daily operations. He still received visitors in the back office, still made decisions that moved money and people and power across the city. Clara knew this. She had made peace with it, not because she approved, but because she had learned, over a lifetime of hard experience, that people are not simple. Vincent was a man who funded community centers and arranged flowers for strangers' funerals. He was also a man whose power came from a world that operated outside the law. Both things were true. Both things lived inside the same person, and Clara, who had been married to a man who appeared respectable and had been anything but, had learned to judge people by their actions rather than their labels. In April, something unexpected happened. Clara received a letter at the library. It was addressed to her by name, in handwriting she did not recognize. The return address was a law firm in the suburbs. She opened it at her desk, and as she read, her hands began to tremble. The letter was from Gerald's lawyer. It explained that Gerald Jennings had recently been the subject of a financial audit, during which irregularities were discovered in the handling of their divorce settlement. Specifically, Gerald had concealed significant assets during the divorce proceedings: a retirement account, a stock portfolio, and a rental property in Indiana that had never been disclosed. Under Illinois law, Clara was entitled to a portion of these assets, and the court was prepared to reopen the case. The amount was substantial, not life-changing in the way a lottery ticket is life-changing, but significant enough to alter Clara's financial future. Enough for a down payment on a small condo, enough to pay off the debts that had accumulated during her years of poverty, enough to breathe. Clara sat at her desk and stared at the letter. She read it 3 times. Then she set it down and looked out her office window at the city below. The traffic on State Street, the pedestrians bundled in spring jackets, the pigeons on the windowsill of the building across the street. And she thought about justice. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes slowly, without fanfare after years of waiting. She called Deborah first. Deborah screamed so loudly that Clara had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Are you serious? Clara, are you serious? That lying, cheating, he hid money from you. And now you're getting it. Oh my God, oh my God. And Deborah, calm down. I will not calm down. This is the best thing that has ever happened. When do you get the money? How much is it? Can we go shopping?" Clara laughed. "I need a lawyer. I need to respond to this letter and start the process." "Vincent will know a lawyer. Ask Vincent." Clara paused. She had been thinking about this. "I don't want to ask Vincent." "Why not?" "Because this is mine. This is something I need to do on my own. Vincent has done so much for me, the dress, the salon, the job, the car, and I am grateful for all of it. But this, Deborah, this is my fight. Gerald took something from me, and I want to take it back myself." Deborah was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "That's the Clara I've been waiting for." Clara hired her own lawyer, a woman named Andrea Chen, who came recommended by Dr. Okafor and who specialized in family law. Andrea was sharp, efficient, and quietly fierce. She reviewed the documents, filed the necessary motions, and within 6 weeks the case was reopened. Gerald fought it, of course. He hired his own lawyers, contested the claims, tried to minimize the concealed assets. But the evidence was clear, the court was unsympathetic, and by early June a judge ruled in Clara's favor. Clara received the settlement in mid-June, a check that she held in her hands with a sense of disbelief that gradually transformed into something else. Power. Not the kind Vincent wielded, a quieter kind. The power of a woman who had been knocked down and had gotten back up and had fought for herself, and had won. She paid off her debts. She put a down payment on a small but lovely one-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood she had always loved but had never been able to afford. It had hardwood floors and big windows, and a kitchen with counter space, and a bathroom with a mirror she was not afraid to look into. She moved in on a Saturday in July with Deborah and Tommy, who Vincent had sent ostensibly to help carry boxes but really to make sure the movers did not scratch anything, doing most of the heavy lifting. Vincent came over that evening with a bottle of wine and a small gift, a framed quote, handwritten in elegant calligraphy that read, "The only journey is the one within." It was Rilke. "For your new home," he said. Clara hung it on the wall above her bookshelf, a real bookshelf, one she had bought at a vintage furniture store in Nassau. Pilsen, which she filled that night with the books that had been stacked around her old apartment. She stood back and looked at it. The bookshelf, the books, the framed quote, the warm light from the floor lamp, the clean walls, the hardwood floor. And she turned to Vincent and said, "I think this is the first time I've lived somewhere that feels like mine." Vincent put his arm around her. "It is yours," he said. "All of it. You earned every inch. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Clara's journey from that diner to this moment, then hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's forgotten who they are. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that transformation is possible, that suffering is not the end of the story, that the people we become after we break are often stronger and more beautiful than the people we were before. Summer in Chicago is a miracle. After the brutal winters, the city explodes with life. Festivals, outdoor concerts, baseball games, the lakefront packed with runners and cyclists and families. Clara experienced this summer differently than any summer before it. She experienced it as a woman who was alive, not just surviving, alive. She walked to work in the morning sunlight. She ate lunch in Grant Park, sitting on the grass with a book and a sandwich, watching the sailboats on Lake Michigan. She attended concerts at Millennium Park with Vincent, who turned out to have an unexpected love of jazz and a tendency to tap his foot off beat, which Clara found endearing. She was promoted again in August to head of community programming, a newly created position that Dr. Okafor had designed specifically for Clara. The job allowed her to expand the initiatives she had started and create new ones. She launched a literacy partnership with 3 elementary schools on the South Side. She created a summer reading program that reached over 1,000 children. She organized a monthly series of author talks that drew crowds large enough to fill the library's auditorium. The local press covered the events, and Clara was interviewed for a segment on a Chicago news station, during which she said, with a calm confidence that amazed even herself, "Libraries are not just buildings with books. They are places where people come to find themselves, and everyone deserves that chance." The segment aired on a Thursday evening. Vincent watched it from his corner table at Vecchio's on his phone, with Tommy standing behind him. When it ended, Vincent set the phone down and was quiet for a long moment. "She's extraordinary," he said. Tommy nodded. "She is, boss. I want to do something for her. Something significant." Tommy pulled out his notebook. "What did you have in mind?" Vincent was quiet. Then, "The library, the branch library near her old apartment on the South Side. It's underfunded. The building is falling apart. I want to renovate it. Anonymously, of course. New books, new computers, new everything. And I want to name the children's reading room after Maria." Tommy looked at Vincent. In 20 years, he had seen Vincent give orders that ranged from routine to terrifying. But he had never seen Vincent's eyes look like they did right now, luminous with a kind of emotion that went beyond sentimentality. This was love in its most evolved form. Not the desperate, grasping love of youth, but the deep, generous love of a man who had learned that the only things worth keeping were the things you gave away. "I'll make it happen, boss." The renovation began in September. A construction crew appeared at the Southside Branch Library one Monday morning, and the library director, a bewildered but delighted woman named Mrs. Abigail Foster, was informed that an anonymous donor was funding a complete renovation. New shelving, new flooring, new lighting, new computers, new HVAC system, and a beautiful new children's reading room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a mural depicting characters from classic children's books, and a brass plaque by the door that read, "The Maria Moretti Children's Reading Room, because every child deserves a safe place to dream." Clara found out about the children's room on a Saturday when Mrs. Foster called her to ask for advice on stocking the new shelves. Clara listened to the description of the room, and when Mrs. Foster mentioned the plaque, the Maria Moretti plaque, Clara went very quiet. "Could you say that name again?" Clara asked. "Maria Moretti. The donor requested the name specifically. Do you know who that is?" Clara sat on her couch in her new apartment and pressed her hand to her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "I know who that is." She did not call Vincent. Instead, she went to Vecchio's that Wednesday for their regular dinner, and she sat across from him at the corner table, and she looked at him, really looked at him. And she said, "You named the reading." "Room after Maria." Vincent set down his espresso. "You found out." "Mrs. Foster told me." Vincent was quiet. Then, "Maria loved children. She taught elementary school for 15 years before we married. She always said the most important thing you can give a child is a book and a safe place to read it. I should have done this years ago. I should have done it the month after she died. But I wasn't ready. I didn't have the—" He paused, searching for the word, the heart for it. "You gave me that, Clara. You gave me back the heart to do things in her name." Clara reached across the table and took his hands. "She would be proud of you." "She would be proud of you," Vincent said. "She would have loved you." "I think I would have loved her too." They sat there, in the back corner of Vecchio's, holding hands across the table while Dean Martin sang softly from the speakers, and the smell of garlic and bread and tomato sauce wrapped around them like a blanket. And for a moment, everything was perfect. Not the brittle perfection of a life without problems, but the real earned perfection of two people who had suffered and survived and found each other on the other side. But life, as Clara had learned, does not stay perfect. It moves, it shifts, it throws things at you when you least expect them. And in October, it threw something at Clara that would test her in ways she had never been tested before. It started with a phone call. Clara was at the library, in her office, reviewing proposals for a new digital archive project, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. "Ms. Jennings, this is James Whitfield from the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a story about philanthropy in Chicago, and your name has come up several times in connection with the Harold Washington Library's community programs. I'd love to do a profile on you." Clara was flattered but cautious. "A profile? I'm not sure I'm profile-worthy." "On the contrary, Ms. Jennings, your story is exactly the kind of story our readers connect with. A career woman who took a break, rebuilt her life, and is now making a significant impact on her community. It's inspiring." Clara agreed to the interview, which took place the following week at the library. James Whitfield was a veteran reporter, late 50s, grey beard, sharp eyes behind round glasses. He asked thoughtful questions about Clara's career, her programs, her vision for the library's role in the community. Clara answered honestly and enthusiastically, and by the end of the interview she felt good about it. She felt like she had told her story well. But then, as Whitfield was packing up his notebook, he asked one more question. A casual question, delivered with the practiced nonchalance of a reporter who knows exactly what he's doing. "Ms. Jennings, I noticed that the recent renovation of the South Side Branch Library was funded by an anonymous donor. There's been some speculation about who that might be. Some people have mentioned the name Moretti. Do you have any comment on that?" Clara felt the ground shift, not the gentle shift she had felt when Vincent told her about his world. A sharper shift, an earthquake of a different magnitude. "I have no comment on anonymous donors," she said carefully. Whitfield smiled. "Of course. Thank you for your time." Clara waited until Whitfield was gone, then closed her office door and sat down at her desk and pressed her hands flat against the surface to stop them from shaking. She had known on some level that this was inevitable. You cannot be in a relationship with a man like Vincent Moretti and expect the world to remain unaware. But knowing something intellectually and facing it in the form of a reporter's question are two very different things. She called Vincent that night. She told him about the interview, about Whitfield's question. Vincent listened in silence. Do you think he'll publish something about us? Clara asked. He might. Mention my name in connection with the donation. That's not ideal, but it's not dangerous. The donation was legitimate, legal. There's nothing wrong with a private citizen funding a library renovation. But if they dig deeper, if they start looking into our relationship, then they will find two people who met at a party and fell in love. That is the truth, Clara. There is nothing incriminating about the truth. The truth is more complicated than that. The truth is always more complicated. But the facts, the verifiable, publishable facts, are more simple. A man donated money to a library. A woman works at a different library. They know each other. That's all anyone can prove. Clara took a breath. I'm scared. I know. And I'm sorry. This is the part of my life that I cannot protect you from. The part where who I am creates complications for the people I care about. If you want to step back, Clara, I will understand. Clara closed her eyes. She thought about the diner on Halstead Street, where she had stood behind the counter pouring coffee for people who never looked at her. She thought about the dress, the gala, the dance floor. She thought about the library, the books, the children's reading room with Maria's name on the wall. She thought about all the ways her life had changed in the past 5 months, and she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic or reason, that she could not go back to who she was before. I'm not stepping back, she said, but I need you to be honest with me, always about everything. If there's danger, I need to know. If there's a problem, I need to know. No more secret donations, no more arrangements I don't know about. We're in this together, Vincent. That means we're in all of it together. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You sound like Maria. Clara smiled through her tears. I'll take that as a compliment. It is the highest compliment I know how to give. The article ran in the Tribune 2 weeks later. It was a beautiful piece, a profile of Clara and her work at the library, her next read program, her community partnerships, her vision for libraries as spaces of connection and transformation. The Moretti name was mentioned once, in a single paragraph, as the rumored anonymous donor behind the South Side renovation. There was no speculation about a romantic relationship. There was no scandal. James Whitfield, whatever his suspicions, had written a straight profile piece, and Clara Jennings emerged from it, not as the girlfriend of a powerful man, but as a woman who was making a difference in her city. The article brought attention, more funding for Clara's programs, more volunteers for the children's reading sessions, more invitations to speak at conferences and community events. Clara found herself becoming a public figure, not a famous one, not a powerful one, but a respected one. A woman whose name was associated with positive change, with community impact, with the quiet revolution of putting books in the hands of people who needed them. And through it all, she remained Clara, the woman who had folded towels and poured coffee, the woman who had eaten standing up because sitting alone at a table made her lonelier, the woman who had forgotten her own name and then, with the help of a stranger's kindness and her own stubborn, inextinguishable spirit, had found it again. One evening in late November, almost exactly a year since the Morrison Gala, Clara and Vincent walked along the lakefront. The air was cold, the sky was grey, and the lake was the colour of slate. They walked in silence for a while, their breath making clouds, their shoulders touching. It was a year ago, Clara said. I know. Do you remember what you said to me at the party? You said, some things you don't forget. They just need to be reminded. I remember. Clara stopped walking. She turned to face him. The wind off the lake was sharp, and it made her eyes water, but she did not look away. You reminded me, Vincent. You reminded me of who I was, and then you stepped back and let me become who I'm going to be. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Vincent looked at her, at those grey eyes, at that face that was no longer hollow but full of life and purpose and joy, and he felt the sky inside his chest clear, not partly, not a break in the clouds, all the way clear, blue and open and infinite. You saved me too, you know, he said quietly. How? By letting me be kind. Maria always said the best part of me was the part that wanted to help people. After she died, I buried that part. I thought it made me weak. And then I saw you through that diner window, and something in me said, there is someone who needs what you have to give. Don't be afraid to give it. And I wasn't afraid. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't afraid. Clara took his hand. They stood on the lakefront, two people who had found each other in the middle of their brokenness and had helped each other heal. Not completely. Healing is never complete, and scars never fully disappear. But enough. Enough to stand in the cold and feel warm. Enough to look at the grey sky and see possibility. From suffering to glory. That was the title of this story. But the truth is that it was never about suffering, and it was never about glory. It was about the space between them. That vast, difficult, beautiful space where transformation happens. It was about a woman who forgot who she was, and a man who remembered what it felt like to care. It was about a midnight blue dress and a dance floor, and an espresso, and a bookshelf, and a children's reading room named after a woman who believed that every child deserved a safe place to dream. It was about being seen. If you've watched this all the way to here, I know this story touched you. So do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you stories like Clara's, stories about real people finding their way back to themselves, stories that remind you that no matter how dark things get, there is always a path forward. Hit that subscribe button right now, and if you made it to the end, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know you, so I can see who you are, so I can know who really loves the stories on this channel. I want to meet every single one of you. Hit the like button if Clara's story moved you, and share this video. Send it to someone who is going through a hard time, someone who has forgotten their own strength, someone who needs to be reminded that transformation is not just possible, it is waiting for them. All they need is one person who sees them, one moment, one chance. From suffering to glory. That is not just Clara's story, that is your story too. You just haven't finished writing it yet.